Hi, I'm Milena and welcome to my series Reading Like a BookTuber, where I read favorite books or books that I've bought on the recommendation of a specific BookTuber. I've done this in the past with some of my BookTube friends, but it's time to branch out and read like more BookTubers. Welcome to episode 4 of Reading Like a BookTuber. This episode is going to be the most ambitious yet, because I am going to read like Katie from BooksandThings, and Katie is a BookTuber I have been following maybe for the longest of any BookTubers I've been following. If you know Katie's channel, then you know she reads a lot of classics, so this is going to be a very ambitious episode. I'm holding 3 physical books and they already look like this. I have no idea if I can read this within the time that I've set for it. I intend to really enjoy this. Over the years I've read a lot of Katie's recommendations, so to narrow it down, luckily Katie has a lot of favorite videos. I will link them down below if you're curious to see them. But these were all very high on her favorites list, so that helped me kind of narrow down which one I wanted to read. The first one and the most ambitious one is, I think, maybe Katie's favorite book or one of her favorite books of all times, and that is Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. This may be Dickens' last finished novel and I don't really know what it is about. I found a really lovely audiobook and it is over 800 pages. No, it's over 700 pages, so it's going to be a big one. I will really be using the audiobook as well for this one. And then another one that I've only heard Katie talk about, but when she talked about it, I thought this needs to be on my TBR. That is The Old Women by George Gissing. This is about Victorian women who led an unconventional life. George Gissing has been an author I've been really interested in since hearing Katie talk about it. So we have 2 Victorian novels, which of course we needed some Victorian literature in this video. Then I also have a non-fiction about a Victorian author, and that is Mrs. Gaskell and Me. This is about the personal relationship of the author with Elizabeth Gaskell's life and writing. Sounds really fascinating, and I really love informal non-fiction, which I feel like this is. It's a little bit of memoir, it's a little bit of history, and I feel like it feels a little bit like prose as well. Katie really loved it, and there's a really good chance I will love it as well. And then I have 2 novels that were written more recently. One I am quite nervous to read because of the subject matter, but that is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is a book that I know, boy, my husband tried to read. He is on page 49. I found it on our bookshelves like this. Really love this bookmark that he used. I read The Remains of the Day a few weeks ago and I really loved it, so I know I will love the writing, but the subject matter is, I believe, very dark and a little bit dystopian. A book that I have on my Kindle is The 13th Tale. This is, I think, historical fiction, gothic. Like, I don't really know what it is about. I don't know the story. I don't remember from watching Katie's video, but I do remember that it was her #1 favorite of recently published books. So from all the historical fiction that I have on my TBR because of Katie, I felt like this is the one we're going to have to read for this vlog, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think it will be a bit of a nice break from all the more tougher reads, whether that is tough writing or tough subject matter. I think having a gothic historical fiction in the mix will lighten everything up a little bit. But yeah, this might take me maybe a month. I don't know, we shall see. I think I'm gonna start with the Dickens. I'm really in a Dickens mood since finishing Great Expectations. I really wanted to read another Dickens, so let's go.
No surprise, I talk about this all the time, but my favourite book of all time is Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. You can even tell by the state of my copy that it is my favourite book of all time. It's been read many times. I love Our Mutual Friend hugely. It is my favourite book by my favourite author, and I just love it so much.
I am, let's see, I think 150 pages through of Our Mutual Friend. Nothing compared to the whole novel, but I'm getting through it quite quickly. And it's not because it's an easy read, because I find it incredibly challenging. I feel like so far the Dickens I've read, the first 100 pages, unless you know the story like from a film or anything, you have no idea what the story is going to be, which characters are going to matter more than the other ones, because I feel like we have met so many characters. I'm trying to decide who is going to matter, who is going to play a big part in the story, which storylines are really important for me to fully understand, and which storylines I just can kind of put in the back of my mind. Which I find always really challenging with Dickens, that you have so many characters and that your mind has to decide who to focus on. The writing I also find quite challenging. I'm listening along with the audiobook, and it's a really good audiobook because sometimes audiobook narrators who narrate Dickens are really extreme, especially with the female characters. They really do like a type, and it's pretty annoying when you're reading along, but this narrator gives all the characters quite natural voices. I'll leave the narrator's name down here if you want to listen to that one, if you also have that preference just like me. I feel like I'm keeping the early scene with the boat on the river as like kind of the core of the story, and all the storylines that flowed from that event. I'm kind of trying to follow in that way, and there are some characters that I think are going to be really interesting. One of my favorite characters so far, he is a man who was a servant and now has inherited a large sum of money, and he is trying to figure out, he and his wife are trying to figure out what to do with that money, how to spend it, and I feel like that again really ties together to the core of what happened with the boat on the river, and I'm really enjoying seeing that develop, and he doesn't have the greed of the more richer characters in this book, so I think that's going to be interesting. But yeah, I am having a good time so far, even though I'm super confused and super challenged. I'm curious to see how I will feel about this book when I'm halfway through. I have wonderful news. I am halfway through, finished the first volume, so in a little bit I'm going to start the second volume, and I am really enjoying it. This could be my favorite Dickens, and I think what separates this book from other Dickens novels I've read for me is the characters, because I feel these characters are so well developed. Yes, it took me a while to understand who is who, to understand who matters, but once I got to know them, they're so interesting. They have so much layers to them. They are so much more than you see at first glance. I'm talking about Lizzie, I'm talking about Eugene, I'm talking about Lizzie's ungrateful brother, who in the beginning of the book was a cute little boy. Jenny Wren is so interesting and so witty. I really love her. The rich people are boring me a little bit. They're just not as interesting, although there is like a bit of a plot going on with them as well that I think will be interesting, but that is with the people who are less rich within the rich people. So basically Charles Dickens decided for this book, the richer, the more boring. That's totally fine with me. The plot and the writing is still challenging, and that's the only book I'm reading. Usually when I read such a big classic, I dip in and out of other books, but this is a very good book for me to just focus and take my time with. It has taken me a good few days to get here. This vlog has been going on for at least 5 days. But I did go book shopping yesterday, or book shopping. We just visited some bookstores and we had some fun. The cutest thing I found is in a bookstore near us that has a lot of trinkets and games as well. And I found this little cat, and it is a wrist stand, because when I'm editing there's a lot of hand movement. I've been using it for editing. It's really nice to rest my wrist on this, and it's just the cutest little thing. So I have now a little cat on my desk, and I got 2 secondhand books. One that I put on my winter TBR and didn't own yet, and that is Brave New World by, I never know his name, Aldous Huxley, which I put on my winter TBR, so it's really nice that I got a second-hand copy of it. And then I saw a Virginia Woolf in the discount bin, and that is The Voyage Out, which I have read, but I read the translation, the Dutch translation at the time, and I don't own an English copy. I haven't actually ever seen this kind of edition. It's a bit better, but it was in a discount bin, so that makes sense. But I think the illustration portrays the main character so well. This was completely her vibe, which I really like, if it's not just a random picture, but it actually makes sense for the book. So I got these two secondhand editions. This weekend I have made a lot of time for reading, so it would be really nice. I could get a good way through of Our Mutual Friends and then spend next week with the other reads. I think after this I will read the historical fiction because I'm still in a bit of a spooky, dark historical fiction mood after October. Still in that mood. Hi, it is really a good few days later because I've just not been in a super reading mood. This vlog will take me forever, but that's okay because I am having fun. I want to say 2 days ago, I finished Our Mutual Friends. This is going to end on a 4-star for me, so I don't think I loved it as much as Great Expectations, but there is something about this book that I find hard to describe because there are certain characters, and I'm thinking of Jenny, I'm thinking of Lizzie, I'm thinking of Bella's family, that feels so real, that feels so layered, that feels so much grander than any other Dickens character I've encountered before. So that is something I really loved about this book. The reason I don't always get along with Dickens is because there's so much in a book that doesn't really serve the main characters. That's just kind of a sideline. And while I think this book does a great job in having that all connected to the main event, to the core of the story, there are still parts of the story where I just kind of lose it, where I just kind of lose my interest, where I don't really feel engaged, and it's a bit of a struggle to keep on reading. I'm really glad I read this. I don't think I've read enough Dickens to really look at where it fits within all of his other novels. I think objectively it's the best novel by Dickens I've read so far. Enjoyment wise, it's on number 2. Overall a positive reading experience, but nothing insane, nothing that amazing. And then I started The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield.
Diane Setterfield is another of my absolute favourite contemporary authors. The 13th Tale is my favourite contemporary novel. It's my favourite 21st century novel, and I love it so very much.
The strange thing is I thought that this would be like a typical historical fiction, but it's really not. We follow a woman who works in a rare bookstore. The bookstore is owned by her father and she grew up there, and we get beautiful descriptions of her working there and her living there and how growing up in a bookstore has shaped her, and that's all very beautiful. It's a very descriptive book, which also means that I'm having a little bit of a hard time getting hooked, getting engaged. But now we have started the more gothic vibe and we meet a very mysterious writer who wants her biography written, and she invites our main character who works in a bookstore to go and visit her and write her biography. And it's reminding me of a very recent publication I read, which is called The Writer's Retreat, which is a thriller, and I'm sure this is going to go very different, but the mentorship feel and the gothic feel, and that something is definitely wrong and something is going to be scary. I'm enjoying the descriptive writing, but I think it is so descriptive that I'm having trouble getting engaged with the plot. I'm like alternating between my Kindle and the audiobook. I'm on chapter 6 of 52, so I'm really not that far in, and I do have great hopes that this book is going to take me to some gothic, dark places. Physically, I'm currently reading a book club read, but I think after I finish the 13th Tale, I am going to read Never Let Me Go. Right, I need to do some cleanup. But I started Never Let Me Go and I read around, lots of cats here. I read around 60 pages. This is a weird book.
The author I want to mention is the truly fantastic Kazuo Ishiguro. I've read all his 8 novels and plus his short story collection Nocturnes, and he is one of my absolute favourite authors. I love his books so much. I first discovered Ishiguro when I studied him at university. I studied The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go.
Hello guys. I did a little manicure session with my mom, which I will clean up and tell you what Never Let Me Go is about. Never Let Me Go follows a woman who is a carer. We're not really quite sure what she does because I don't think she's like a regular nurse, and I think we are in current day, but it's kind of dystopian. So it's very strange, and then we follow her memories from a certain boarding school that she was in, and we see that a lot of unconventional strange things happen as well. What I'm thinking is that it's going to be a really dark book, and they're constantly talking about things like donations, and I think it has to do with organs, which I hope I'm wrong about, but I don't think I am. And the first 50 pages were quite a job to get through, but I think I'm in it now. 13th Tale. I haven't listened to much more of the 13th Tale because I've just not been in a big reading mood. I'm in a bit of a slump. They don't usually hang out here, but apparently since I put down an extra chair on this desk, so me and my mom could do nails out here, because otherwise the living room just smells of chemicals and I don't love that. I'm just doing a little cleanup and hopefully some reading. It's a few days before Christmas and my reading has been an absolute mess in this vlog. I was in a bit of a reading slump, so I barely read anything for 2 weeks, but I did get up until I think page 100 of Never Let Me Go. Put that aside for a little bit because I was in the mood for something else. 2 nights ago I picked up The Old Women by George Gissing and I love this. I am loving this so much. I am now on page 172.
The Old Women by George Gissing. This is a wonderful, wonderful late Victorian novel that I love hugely. It is a wonderfully proto-feminist novel with fantastic characters, wonderful plotting, and just so many things that I absolutely love. Cannot recommend it enough.
I would say I am out of my reading slump if 2 nights of reading can get me this far. The core of this book is about a group of sisters whose father has died in the first chapter. He was a doctor and he was a very conservative man concerning how he felt his daughter should live their lives. But neither of them has really lived up to that expectation. All of them are single. All of them are trying to make their way in the world. They are all working, of course, and we meet them. One of them is now out of employment and contacts the other sisters. We get a little bit of their history because I think we meet them 2 years after their father had passed. So they're now all, I think the youngest one is 21 and they're all older. I think the oldest one's like late 20s. We also meet 2 other women who help women in general get jobs, and the book just tells the story of the old women, so the women who are not in pairs. This explores what options there are for women in such a broad variety. It's extremely feminist. I'm sorry if my angle changed, but I had to replace the memory card. Yeah, so this book is about women trying to work and women discussing together what options there are, and really the importance of women having as many options as men do when it comes to making a living for themselves. And all the sisters, they have different characters of course, but they also make different decisions. Although I have to say the sisters are not the most interesting characters. I think one of the sisters, I think it is Virginia, I think, doesn't matter. One of the sisters meets 2 women who provide education for girls so that they can work as a secretary. One of the founders says, Miss Nunn, I think her name is, she says that not all women are suited to become nurses and teachers, and the women who have different talents should also be able to join the workforce. This really is that new woman fiction that Katie talks about sometimes, and I am loving it. Not only of course are the themes the kind of themes that I love to read about, but also the writing is just great. It's fast paced, it's really engaging. It reminds me a bit of E.M. Forster, although this is like a few decades earlier, but I could also see, and maybe that's just me finding things that I want to find, but I could also see how Virginia Woolf was influenced by this kind of writing, and maybe even this author, because there are like little Virginia Woolf bits that I find in here, just details as the names of the characters that you don't see very often in literature, and I feel like, hey, the character in the Waves has the same name, and those are the only 2 times I have seen this name in this kind of literature. But I think if you like E.M. Forster, then this is the kind of writing you will probably also enjoy. I have halfway to go, as you can see, and I'm going to sit down and read a little bit now, and I do think I will finish this and then I will pick up Never Let Me Go again. And then I have a few hours left of 13th Tale, and then I have the Elizabeth Gaskell book to listen to. Then we're done with this vlog, which has been going on for a really long time, but that's okay when you're joined by good books. Hi, it's New Year's Day and I have finished 2 books since I last talked to you. One that I finished is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and like how to talk about this book. I feel like this will be a good book club read because there are so many things in this book that are super interesting to discuss, but all of them are spoiler related, so I cannot really talk about the things that I found most interesting in this book because then I would spoil the book for you. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end up giving this 4 stars because my enjoyment of this book was super low. It was a struggle to get through. If I hadn't made this vlog, I think I might have DNF'd it, and I felt like DNFing it multiple times. But then on the other hand, I see the value of this book and I see that it's a really good book, and that is such a difficult combination, I feel like, especially when you want to review a book. Intrigue was quite low because our main character is very bland. She doesn't really have a strong personality, which does really tie into this book, and I think it's all very deliberate. That does mean that it's quite difficult to get through. So this is a dystopian version of our world. The main character slowly starts to discover. The thing is, it is written as if it is a contemporary coming of age novel. We are really just inside her head, inside romances, friendships, just a very basic coming of age story, but it has this dystopian background, and that sounds quite fascinating, and I think it's very cleverly done, but it also means that what you maybe want from this book, and that is to have a bigger expansion of the world, a bigger focus on why this is a dystopian world and how everything connects. You don't really get that. You really get the character focused parts of it, and like I said, I didn't really care about the characters. It felt a bit of a dark academia hint, so I think people who love that will really love these characters, but to me it just wasn't that interesting. But then I think the way this was written, the writing, I loved the way it was written, the goals, and a lot of things that I cannot discuss I really did love about this book. So I can absolutely see how this would be someone's favorite book. It's just not really my cup of tea. I don't know, it's so hard to talk about. I mean, I'm really glad that I read it because I now have the context of this book, and the end of this book did a lot with me. It nauseated me, it was heartbreaking, it was a lot of different things. But again, cannot really talk about that without spoiling the book. And then I also read another book that I kind of struggled through, which was the 13th Tale. Maybe it's a little bit the same, like I can see this is a well-written historical fiction dual timeline kind of book, but is it for me? Not really. It reminded me of the way that I felt about Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, which feels a bit similar, but it was just kind of not for me. And I have a really hard time pinpointing why. Maybe it is the way that the plot and a mystery resolves and intertwines, and how things are revealed and what the revelations are. I think sometimes certain type of revelations aren't really super intriguing or engaging to me, and I feel like I had the same issues with that when I read Sarah Waters. I think if you love Sarah Waters, which I know 90% of people do, then the 13th Tale will probably be a good recommendation for you. So I think I gave that like a 3.5 because in that book, surprisingly, I really loved the characters. I just didn't really love the writing and the plot. So all different things. This has been a complicated vlog, especially because doing this series, I thought that Katie's books would be the books that I would love without question. That's not really, like, I feel very conflicted about all of these books. But then, the last two books I'm currently reading for this vlog are 5-star predictions because I'm loving both of them so much. I think I talked to you about The Old Women by George Gissing, and I don't think I've read more from it. I'm now 200 pages in. I don't think I've read more since I talked to you because I wanted to switch to Never Let Me Go so that I could finish that in 2023 so that I could count that towards my reading goal, and also because I had already filmed my favorites of the year, and I kind of feel like this could be a favorite, so then it can count for 2024. And yesterday I started an audiobook. I started the last book for this vlog, which is Mrs. Gaskell and Me.
The next author I wanted to mention is the amazing Nell Stevens. I have read 2 out of her 3 books and I loved both of them so much, and I found both of them like profoundly moving and just amazing and cool and different in all the best ways. Mrs. Gaskell and Me is like half a kind of fictionalized version of bits of Elizabeth Gaskell's life, and half kind of a story exploring a woman called Nell who's doing a PhD on Elizabeth Gaskell.
And this is such an addictive read, which it's hard to describe what it is, like genre-wise at all. I think it's like a memoir with a lot of fiction in it. I will give you a little synopsis once I finished it and I kind of know what it is. But I'm loving the writing and loving the audiobook narration. It is a really, really engaging read, which I'm loving. But I'll talk to you more about that book once I finished it. Hi, and welcome to what I guess will be the end of this vlog. This weekend I had I'm just removing the sticker. I hate that my thrift store puts like these really big stickers on their books, but besides the point, I had a little thrift store excursion and I found Aurora Leap by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and we discussed this book in some Victober reading sprints, which I believe I'm remembering this right, that Katie was also at those sprints, and Katie and Kate and a few others were talking about Aurora Leap. The way they were talking about it really fascinated me because it is written in verse. Like, it's a whole as well, it looks like a novel written in verse, And that sounds like such an amazing experience and so challenging as well. And I think this is quite a unique edition. But talking about Victober, about Victorian literature, I finished The Old Woman by George Gissing. And I think this is a 5-star. Or am I sure it is a 5-star? Because I loved it. I don't know how to describe why I love this so much. It's kind of E.M. Forster meets Elizabeth Gaskell for me, and those are authors I somehow don't call favorite authors, but I enjoy everything I read by them, so maybe they should be like in my almost favorites list. And I've read quite a few by both of them, and I'm going to read quite a bit by George Gissing because this is so interesting, especially for a Victorian novel. The writing is very accessible, the writing is quite fast-paced, quite a lot of things happen. We don't have a lot of weird sidelines, which I think is a Victorian thing that can be a bit fatiguing when you're reading it. This is so beautifully centered on the sisters and on the big theme in this book of women being the old women, of women having their own life, finding options beyond marriage, and the way that marriage is portrayed and discussed in this book is both scandalous and very interesting. I had such a strong 5-star feel when I was finishing this book, and when I read the last page, when I read the last sentence, you just have those feelings sometimes, and I absolutely love this book. Another book that I also really enjoyed, I think it's such a wonderful way to end a vlog like this with just the books you have enjoyed most at the ending, is Mrs. Gaskell and Me by Nell Stevens. This was such, I think I called it readable, super fast paced, and romance is such a big part of this book that it feels almost like I'm reading a romance and like I want to know what happens with the romance. We follow our narrator called Nell. Is she the author? Is she not the author? It's a bit vague. Like, is it a memoir or is it fiction? It's a little bit in between, and that's fine. But she is in love with a man called Max, and she is also writing her PhD on Victorian literature. The way those two things intertwine, the relationship she has with Elizabeth Gaskell and the subjects that she writes about, and the relationship that she has with this man called Max, are beautifully described, and I just was really invested in how everything would happen. And then we have the research she is doing on Elizabeth Gaskell and Elizabeth Gaskell's romantic life. Mainly the focus is on that and her love for independence and how she experienced her marriage. It's so the opposite of dry non-fiction that I would highly recommend this for anyone who is not a non-fiction reader or who occasionally reads non-fiction but just doesn't really feel like they love it the same way as they love fiction. I also don't know if this is purely marketed as non-fiction, but it's how I approached it. I think you're gonna really enjoy the genre bending of this book. This book I didn't quite give a 5 stars. I think it's gonna be a 4.5 because it didn't have the same feel, but I am absolutely going to read more by Nell Stevens. I know she wrote Bleaker House and she wrote one that was really popular I think last year, Briefly a Delicious Life. So those two I'm 100% getting my hands on and going to read. So this is the end of this vlog. The last 2 books that I read I enjoyed most. The first 3 books I had mixed feelings about. Reading Katie's books I knew that I was kind of staying within my comfort zone, but I did pick up the books that were not necessarily very high on my TBR or very high on my radar. I would have picked another Dickens for my next Dickens, and I would have probably read Briefly a Delicious Life instead of Mrs. Gaskell and Me, and I had such a wonderful time. And while I definitely want to read The Old Women, I don't know when I would have done that, and I'm so glad I've done it now. So yeah, my favorite of course of this vlog is The Old Women, which is not fully unexpected because when Katie talked about this book I just knew I was going to find it really interesting. The fact that I like the writing and that it's so incredibly readable was quite surprising to me. Before I end this vlog, I do want to say that Katie announced while I was filming this vlog that she is going to publish a new book called Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hearst, and it sounds absolutely amazing. I will leave a link down below to the announcement video so that you can check it out. Thank you so much for watching this vlog. I hope you had fun. Let me know if you're interested in reading any of these books, and I hope that you have a lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!